Hello friends, this is Juliana and I'm so glad you're here. This is part 1 of my For the Love of Snowflakes series. I was recently going through my stash and realized once again that I have a slight addiction to snowflakes and have collected a mix of dies, stencils, and stamps that feature snowflakes. I decided to challenge myself to use some of the new products and make some winter-themed cards. Here's a look at my snowflake collection. It includes this beautiful 3D impresslet from Holtz that both embosses and die cuts 2 snowflakes. Next up are these circle snowflake shaker and snowflake dies from Waffle Flower Crafts. I can't wait to make a shaker card with these. The next die is from Hero Arts and is called the Snowflake Cluster. Another die I have is this stunning snowflake by Holtz. This is a little bit older, but it's still a favorite with all its delicate details. This snowflake die is from scrapbook.com and I love how it includes a little banner area that works perfectly with the coordinating stamp set. The final set of dies I have are these fancy Flakes cover plate from Honeybee Stamps. They can be used separately or together to create a variety of stunning backgrounds. Along with dies, I also have a few stencils. These 2 are from Holtz and the others are from scrapbook.com. I love the mix of sizes and styles. Surprisingly, I only had 1 snowflake stamp set in my stash, and it's the scrapbook.com Slimline Snowflake Stamp Set. Now that you've seen my snowflake collection, let's dive into the making. In this video, I'm going to take you through the process of creating 3 winter cards using the Honeybee Stamps Fancy Flakes cover plate. I love that this set can be used together or alone to create a variety of stunning backgrounds. I began by selecting the colors of cardstock I wanted to work with. I decided to go a bit traditional and selected the light blue and dark blue papers from the scrapbook.com Cools A2 paper pad. These paper pads make selecting what colors to work with so easy since all the colors coordinate. These cover plates are A2 size, so they are a perfect fit for these papers. I added a piece of mint tape to hold the papers in place as I run them through my die cutting machine. This isn't absolutely necessary if you are super careful about running your dies through a machine. However, I find it helpful in keeping the papers from sliding around, especially when you are die cutting a piece of paper the same size as the die. After I finished die cutting, I placed the die cut onto the Sizzix foam pad and rolled the die brush over the paper to loosen the inside pieces, and then used the die pick to poke them out. This tool set is so handy when working with intricate dies such as this one. The next background I created was using the pierced cover plate. I absolutely love the stitched detail and texture it adds to the paper. For the third background, I used both of the cover plates. I used the one that die cuts the snowflake background first, once again using mint tape to hold it in place. I then used mint tape to hold the pierced cover plate in place as I die cut the paper again. As I said earlier, I absolutely love the texture that the stitching adds to the paper. With all 3 backgrounds completed, I started on my first card using just the die cut snowflakes with the pierced design. I wanted to add a layer of color behind it with a bit more interest than just plain cardstock. So I grabbed my Distress ink swatches and picked out Prize Ribbon as a good color match to my cardstock. I ink blended it around the outside edge of the paper using a foam blending brush. I placed the die cut onto the paper a couple of times to make sure I was getting enough ink onto the paper so it would show behind the die cut. Next, I spritzed the paper with some water using my Distress sprayer and dabbed it dry with a paper towel to remove some of the ink and add to the snowy effect. I then dried the paper using my heat tool. Once the paper was dry, I wanted to add a little more detail, so I decided to add some ink splatter using picket fence distress spray stain. I made sure to shake it well to mix the ink, and then instead of spraying, I unscrewed the lid and used the straw inside to splatter my ink. I recommend tapping off some of the excess to avoid any large splatters and to rotate your paper to get a more random splatter pattern over the entire surface of your paper. I ended up making two of these backgrounds, one on a light blue and another on a dark blue paper, but I ended up using the dark blue one for my finished card. The next card I worked on was the shaker card using the die cut background. I cut a piece of acetate to just slightly smaller than 4¼ by 5½ inches to avoid having any of it overhanging the edges. If you end up with any hanging over, it's easy to fix. All you need to do is use your scissors to trim away any excess. Next, I adhered double-sided adhesive tape to the edges of the die cut. This is 1/8 inch wide tape and was the perfect size to fit the frame. Once I had taped around all of the edges, I began to adhere the acetate. I removed one side of the adhesive and then carefully lined up the die cut in acetate. I then removed the liner from the other sections and adhered everything together. To create the shaker box, which will hold the shaker bits, I applied 1/8 inch foam tape around the outside edge. Once I had the shaker box created, I started adding the shaker bits. For this, I used the Sizzix Arctic Sky sequins and beads. I poured them out onto the back panel of the card so I could get a feel for how much I wanted to add. I ended up using a mix of the sequins, but not any of the beads, as they would have been too tall for the thickness of the foam tape and wouldn't have been able to move around any. Once I was happy with the amount of sequins, I started peeling back the liner from the adhesive foam tape. As you can see, I just started to peel back the liner but left the rest of it intact. I then poured the sequins into the shaker box. I find it much easier to line up the shaker box in the back panel when I do it this way. I then took the back panel and lined it up along the bottom edge where I hadn't peeled off the liner yet. By only just starting to peel off the liner, it makes it super easy to line the front and back panels up with each other. Then once they are lined up, I can push the back panel down onto the sticky parts to hold it in place, and then peel off the rest of the liner to fully adhere the panel. With all 3 backgrounds completed, it was time to work on my sentiments. I used a mix of alphabet dies, including the Tim Holtz Alphanumeric stretch upper dies and the Scrapbook.com classic type and bold upper alphabet dies to create some dimensional letter stickers. I spelled out each word using the dies and then placed them on the card front to get a feel for how they would look. I knew I wanted them to have some dimension, so I began by adding a piece of white cardstock to a length of 2-inch wide double-sided foam tape. I then die cut the letters using my die cut machine. Because you are die cutting through cardstock and the adhesive foam, the die may not cut completely through the liner. That's totally okay. Just peel off the letters and adhere them to your craft mat to continue the next step. To give the letter stickers a bit more interest, I applied Scrapbook.com Snowflake Pops of Color to each letter. Pops of Color is a liquid embellishment that dries with a bit of dimension. This particular one is beautiful, sparkly glitter finish, just perfect for my snowflake-themed cards. I gently squeezed out the pops of color and used the tip to spread it out onto each letter. I also lightly rubbed my finger over each letter to spread it out and make it more even. I just love the touch of sparkle and shine this adds to the letters. I repeated this process for all of the letters and set them to the side to dry. Here's a look at all 3 of the backgrounds I created. Now it's time to add the sentiments. Once the letter stickers were dry, I used a ruler to help me line them up as I adhered them to each of the cards. I then finished off each card by adding a type sentiment that I created using my typewriter and white cardstock. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and I hope this project inspires you to pull out your collection of crafty supplies and start making. I'll be back soon with part 2 of For the Love of Snowflakes. Until then, I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next video. Thanks again and happy crafting!